you for coming up for this talk anyway. As I say, my colleague Bob Will is, as we speak, hopefully digging out a 17th century medieval ditch on the tram works, but we'll come on to that maybe later. Today's talk is really an update of what we've been doing on site over almost the last year, really, starting really in start of November, but really from the start of this year. And it's been a lot of interesting discoveries, and also as fieldwork archaeology has obviously been a few challenges that we all know about. So it's really going to be a rush through of some of the sort of key things we've been looking for. And for those who were here last year, an update really on the excavation of the human remains of the cemetery, which is the focus of our work, which was a talk presented by Julie at Headland last year, Julie Franklin. So bear with me as we go through this talk today. For those long-suffering Edinburgh people, and I apologise, obviously, and those in Edinburgh, the tram itself was obviously started in the noughties, and it was stopped. Was it 2008? Was the extension down to Newhaven was ceased at that point. Now, we went back, and we've got permission to extend it last year. Went to committee, and we're extending it down to Newhaven. This is the route as we see it. Now, there's some key elements to the project. Most of it's centered around Leith Dock, it's the centre of Leith. So we can see it starts at the 16th century port of Newhaven, goes along in front of Ocean Terminal, which you can probably see is site P1, section 4, runs through the sort of 19th century and 20th century docks, and then comes down Constitution Street which runs at the back, really, of the medieval town, links up with bottom of Leith Walk, and continues up Leith Walk. Leith Walk being the main avenue or route from Edinburgh to its port in Leith. The main areas of archaeological work are obviously centred around Leith and its dock, and the base of Leith Walk, which is for fortifications and part of the medieval time. And also we've got, looking ahead at the top of it, near the playhouse, we've got a World War II air raid shelter to examine, but that probably won't be until next summer. So we're really, for this talk, looking at the work this year so far has really been concentrated around discoveries in Leith Dock and Constitution Street, but also we've made some interesting discoveries on Leith Walk itself, mostly around about the Pilrig area, which we'll go into later. So we set out with some main key objectives on it. One was obviously to investigate the medieval town, investigate the graveyard, and the development of the docks. Now, one of the key things we were looking for was actually around about Ocean Terminal. Now, we know from earlier excavations that most of the site of Leith Docks is modern landfill and doesn't really have much in the way of significant archaeology, but some interesting ways of how the docks have been developed and extended out through Newhaven. But the main one we're actually looking for was this. Is the 1820s Old West Dock, brackets Queen's. Queen's Dock was a part of the West Dock at the western end, which was associated in the mid-19th century with the Navy and the Customs. Now, I'm showing these two pictures. One on the right shows what we're really looking after is the bastion. You can just see the sort of corner. I don't know if you can see here, this very large corner of one of the bastions. The docks were built in the 1820s after the Napoleonic era, and really as a defended dock at that time. And the dock itself, Ocean Terminal, is just off to the left of the picture here in this area. This is a new Cala development, which was excavated by AOC just recently. And you can see these are two dry docks which are contained within this bastion. This is a 19th century extension, or later 19th century extension of what original dry dock you can just see here, and they're preserved in situ. So we thought, you can see the width of the wall is about 2 or 3 meters in extent. And we thought, when we found this cobbled surface, that we might have the corresponding bastion just under the southern end of Ocean Terminal and Ocean Drive. So that was one of the key elements, to look for it and preserve it in situ. Unfortunately, we didn't find it. Or shall we say, we haven't found it so far. As you can see from the picture on the left of the screen, we've got about 2 or 3 meters. This is just a small snapshot of modern or 19th century landfill with no archaeology in it. Now, just although it's a quick screenshot from the 1876 OS map, Ocean Terminal, I don't know if you can see from the back, it sits in roughly here. The Ocean Drive comes along through this direction and here. So Ocean Terminal sits on top of this bastion. So we're probably not going to get this here. But what we got in the third quarter of the 19th century is this railway station and goods yard that's been cut right through the site. That's the corner of the bastion and dry dock that I showed you in the previous image. So what we think is that the railway company basically have cut through this dockyard and removed it, certainly in this area, and probably maybe also the effects of demolition of the shipyard in the 20th century may have removed it. We might have, and we're still hoping out, this section here, you just see the line with my cursors going along. So, sorry, off the dry dock. We might have this surviving underneath the road, but we're not hopeful at the moment. So moving along, one of the questions is about, we're trying to understand, is the reclamation of Leith Harbour and the port. Now, we seem to have got a lot more information coming out through the area of the north end of Constitution Street, roughly between the junction of Bernard Street, Junction Street, and going up towards Ocean Drive. Some of the excavation, we're going to go about 1.5 meters down, or sorry, just over a meter down in areas, but the design of the tram has been altered, so we're actually preserving a lot more archaeology. It's been shallower foundations, but there has been a few design changes, and this area has really turned up quite a lot of interesting discoveries. It's given a real picture of how, from roughly the start, late 16th, but really from the start of the 17th century, this stretch of Constitution Street has actually been reclaimed from the sea, from basically the beach, medieval shoreline. And we've got, as you can see from the image on the right of the screen, we've got this dumps of material. This is a very interesting dump, only a small part of a large cache of mid-17th century clay pipes. There's actually some quite early ones in there. And then the image on the left-hand screen, if you can just see it's actually they're sort of very large rounded stones. It's part of what we suspect is a 17th century sea wall, with which survived probably into the 19th century in parts. The boundary here is actually for later 19th century, 19th century industry works, but there's also a naval dockyard, or not naval dockyard, naval supply base in there as well. One of the more interesting discoveries, actually, I wouldn't say unique, but certainly unique in Edinburgh, and it's caused a lot of interest, was the discovery in this area of effectively the ulnar and radius of a right ulnar and radius of an adult sperm whale. Unfortunately, it was discovered in mixed deposits from a service trench that were being excavated. So the big question is, we often see whale bones, whale arches, which are obviously the jaw bones of whales, quite common across the Forth and Scotland. I mean, obviously close links with the whaling industry, but to have these two basic offcuts in mixed materials is actually really quite interesting and quite strange. You don't really expect to find those cuts here. So they do show butchery marks on them, and so we thought, well, we'll try and date them. And you can see the date that came back from 1633 to 1833, but really probably looking at around about the later end of that period, Now the questions still survive: is this part of the whaling industry? Leith is a major port, certainly in the 20th century, with big connections with South Georgia in the 20th century whaling and the Falklands, but also the North Sea is a major whaling concern throughout this period. But we could also be looking at a beaching. I mean, we've had beachings recently, if people might know, of sperm whales in the Forth. So it could be from that. It's still a mystery, but one that's quite interesting. Just moving up Cottage Street, most of it, as I say, is on the edge of the medieval time. And we've been skipping along. The archaeology has been largely preserved, and said we have gone deeper in some places. And one of those more interesting discoveries was actually just a couple of months ago, was the remains of what appears to be a medieval seawall extending out. This is going across east-west, so extending away from the medieval town, and might sort of represent the early medieval shoreline, and built to construct and preserve maybe field systems to the south of this. The archaeologist is actually to the north of the wall. Found next to it was actually this very strange, interesting sort of font or trough, actually incorporated within the stone wall itself. Now we're moving probably a mile or so south from Cottage Street. This is actually towards the foot of Leith Walk, just round about the Pilrig area, and we didn't expect to find any or very little in the way of archaeology in Leith Walk. Obviously, with the modern road, we'd have taken off probably 600 to 700 millimeters, so over half a meter of road makeup. So with that, and obviously a lot of modern services that have gone through it, we're quite surprised to find this structure. Now it's roughly about a rectangular structure. The gap in the middle is actually a modern service that's cut through it. This is Gemma from Guard Archaeology just cleaning it up. But you can actually see it's roughly about 2 to 3 meters lengthwise and about 2 meters or so across. It's a base of something. What it is exactly, we haven't got much of an idea at the moment. But what you can see, interestingly, is these timber posts have survived. Well, we've got 2 timber uprights and a beam going across it. It's more towards, what we're finding is it's on the eastern side of the road. So potentially, are we looking at a base for some kind of water pump? There's a lot of drainage in this area and an old burn that may go close to the site. Or is it maybe a base of a toll booth, a toll gate coming across? We'll need to do a lot more work on it. But interesting, perhaps even more interesting, something that's caught a lot of attention from the public, is what was actually underneath this. This is Gemma again. What we have is part of the medieval road surfaces, well, several road surfaces, you should say, going back to the medieval period. And we do seem to now have the original Leith Walk, the road that's going for the first time, going from Edinburgh down into Leith. Now it seems to be all on this eastern side. You can see the state of preservation in this area, and it's protected roughly about a metre and a half below the current road surface. There's been quite a lot of build-up, and we're getting tantalising glimpse of earlier road surfaces as we go along Leith Walk itself. Obviously, the main focus of this year's work has been the excavation of South East Parish graveyard. Now, for those who were here last year, this was excavated by ourselves in Headland in 2008, which we found underneath Constitution Street the remains of basically 2 graveyards. One medieval one dating probably from around about 1300 up to 1480, and that's when South East Parish Church of St Mary's was built in 1483, and it continued on to roughly around about 1650 when Constitution Street was remodelled behind the fortifications, and we find roughly around about 380 complete burials underneath the road. Now, as part of the tram project, the side of the road had to, the graveyard walls had to be taken down, and we're going to be rebuilding that next year. So this is sort of a picture on the left-hand side of the work just before, and I mean literally just before COVID struck in mid-March, where we've taken down the wall to sort of basically the level of the graveyard. You'll see piling. Now we had to design those piling they're designed effectively not to disturb any of the burials of post 1650, or saying post 1790, sorry, when the graveyard wall was actually put in this position. So we made sure that we weren't disturbing modern human remains, and we actually designed as much not to disturb any human remains at all. But obviously, we had to put them in for safety, for the workers as well as general public. So effectively, what we're seeing is we had to just take a decision, unfortunately, to disturb some of the medieval graves. But most of the ones on the graveyard side would have been cut through by the modern Victorian and later graves themselves. Now, as you can see from the picture on, so basically the wall was taken down right up to the date of lockdown, and it coincided perfectly with that. And then we were supposed to start the main excavation of the graveyard, obviously in late March. Now that stopped for the full period of lockdown, so we weren't really getting back on site until the start of June. Hence why you can see the difference in the foliage of the trees in the picture. Now, as you can see, we've taken down the wall by this stage, and you can see the remains of the graveyard now coming up within spade's depth or shovel depth below the actual modern pavement. Now, as you say, COVID-19 and new ways of working, I think we're all been used to that in various aspects. I mean, working from home since March. But also, you can see, not a very flattering picture of myself, but obviously, having to wear masks more recently outdoors, social distancing. Well, that's had an effect, obviously, on the work on site. And you can see from the picture of the team from Guard, we had to sort of be social distancing during the excavation process. So the site was divided up into 5 meters patches, and each 5 meters was given was with one archaeologist. So they dug that 5 meter patch. We weren't really looking at, although we're trying to keep it as much as stratigraphic a timeline going across the site and open up the whole area, you're seeing we actually had to do it in smaller chunks as well, which has caused some challenges, but obviously it has worked really well. As well, thankfully, touch wood, there's been no cases of COVID on the site. Now, we've made a few discoveries. I'll talk about the graveyard very quickly shortly, but we did discover, well, there's a couple of really important features that have come to light, and also more information on one that was discovered in 2008, where we thought we had a very large quarry pit in the middle of the graveyard. Now, this has really turned into be, we've got more information now, really what it is. I think what we're looking at is a very large northwest-southeast ditch now, which predates the graveyard, so we're looking, well, potentially pre-14th century. If this ditch was on Great Junction Street or further to the west, running in the north-south, this would almost the scale of the town defences that we find elsewhere in Leith, but it's going right across a north 45-degree angle to the Constitution Street and the layout of the medieval town. As you see, it's sort of going 45 degrees towards St Mary's Church in the background, and it is massive. It is just over 10 metres and at least three metres deep. This has just been finished excavation last week. Unfortunately, it's basically sealed by all the grades, so we're looking at certainly 1300s and earlier. No real pottery has come out of it, but one surprising feature, though you might say it's a burial, it's not that surprising, but it is halfway through, in the middle of the ditch, literally middle cross and in depth, was a crouched burial. Now, most burials should be on the side east-west and on their back as Christian burials. This is actually crouched sort of north-south as well in orientation. Now you can just see it being excavated there. Now see a bit more of a closer up. I think it's an adult female. It looks like it's been dumped in the middle of this ditch because it's actually sealed. There's no cut from above. Lying on her side, our right side with her knees obviously crouched up. This has just been found in the last couple of weeks, so obviously she's been taken away to be cleaned. We haven't seen any forensic evidence on it. But are we potentially looking at a murder victim? Who knows? It certainly doesn't seem to be related to the Christian burial ground on top. Now, this will be obviously, she'll be carbon dated, so hopefully we'll try and get some idea of the date, not only of her, but also the ditch itself. Now, one of the more important discoveries is actually this wall. It doesn't look much, but in effect, this is the southern boundary wall for the graveyard associated with that, with the church of St Mary's built in 1483. So we now got a boundary of the graveyard on its southern limit. Now, we assumed we had a burial from the previous excavations. We're seeing an extension of the burial ground from 1480 to 1650 going towards the south. We've never had the actual early medieval the medieval boundaries of the graveyard. And you can see just behind Gemma from Guard is basically the modern limits of the graveyard to about 5 meters to the south, and that corresponds to really the graveyard extent from about certainly into the 18th century and to the modern day. Well, the graveyard itself, yes, we got more burials. More of the same. We've got a general population of graves. We've got obviously more coffin burials. Actually, some of them seem to be really quite early, getting a lot more earlier ones, I think, than we had before. And the burial, as you can see on the left-hand side of the screen, is actually a very strange position, although it's normally east-west. But as you can see, the knees are actually bent up. So what we think actually is the top half of the burial is actually slumped into that ditch you saw earlier. We're getting some family groups. This is one of the latest burials just found last week. It's an adult with a young child. And we're receiving that was found before, and we're getting quite a few of those as they're coming through. Now, obviously, probably died together in some kind of presumably a pandemic or some disease episode. These probably date, given the position that we haven't dated them, to the 14th century. One of the things more interesting features is actually, although in the previous excavation we found some multiple burials, and the largest mass burial pit had contained 4 adults, all female. I think that was really one of the more interesting discoveries. But this year we've actually possibly got a real plague pit. You can just see here, although there looks like a circular line, I'm just outraged. This is actually misleading, as it's more to do with iron panning from a possible service leak from where you see the arrow ranging rod on top, but a lot of services in this area and a drain. So we think that's caused by that. But what we have is this area here is cut through by the Victorian sewer, so nothing up here. But what we got is 1, 2, 3, 4 burials there, and a young child going this way, north-south across it. What we have is a large rectangular burial pit, which contained over 20 burials in about 3 or 4 layers. Now, it looks really much like a plague burial pit. Some of them being dumped in, but to have that in one concentration is unique. We may have another one which might come out in post-excavation. We've also got some interesting pathology. This is a rather gruesome abscess on the left ankle, which is obviously healed during life. It must be excruciatingly painful. But you can just see over here, although it's slightly fractured, but it looks like there's possibly a heel fracture as well. This might be just slightly coming up. This is a more interesting individual, possibly a hunchback. So you can just see this, the left shoulder has been actually up over the burial, and sort of curvature of the spine, which is probably in life rather than caused by decay in the ground. Now, possibly one of the more interesting ones is this adult female. Now, discovered about a month ago. It's quite early, given its location in the sequence, possibly 14th century. Certainly, I would argue, we haven't dated, but certainly probably before the church, 1480. Now, you just see this hole in the front of the head. Now, obviously, was this caused after death or something? But no, it's actually the result of trepanning and a compressed skull fracture. There's another, this healing, it's actually, you see the soft edge to the cut, the hole in the skull. It's actually bone growth, and this is actually possibly an earlier trepanning of compressed fracture. It's actually healed over. So this individual survived for some period of time with a large hole in the front of her skull, and obviously we'll do a lot more research into her. The last burials, well, this is a photograph taken yesterday. Number 354 and 355. We're hopefully at the end of the burial phase, and we have people on site finishing off today, but these are the last two complete burials, much to the relief of everybody involved, I think. This is actually too quite interesting. We got a very young child, probably under 1 or just 1 to 2, and this is actually on top of the ditch. And this is actually really interesting one as well. This is actually north-south burial. The head should be here, but it's probably decayed, and we've got 2 heads, possibly as charnel, in the pits as well. So not only do we have the last burials, but actually 2 very interesting ones as well. Now, just to come into the last slides, outreach has been a really important part of the project. Unfortunately, COVID has put a stop to some of it. We were hoping to get members of the public involved in watching the finds, maybe not so much the burials. So we had a group of volunteers. Unfortunately, we had to put that on hold and probably stop, because obviously we couldn't get social distancing and mixing throughout the project. We've kept the project as very much open to the public, so the excavations throughout the summer have been a very conscious decision to make it open to public. People can see the archaeology, and encouraged to talk to the team throughout the process. It's been really well received, I think, throughout, certainly by the project, and a lot of real interest from the members of the public. We've got people coming down to see the site, which is tremendous. And we also decided that we can't get out, obviously restrictions in having site visits, etc. We do weekly vlogs, unfortunately listening to myself, the public, over the course of the summer. And this is still live. Although the weekly vlogs will probably stop so much now, we will be continuing them on a regular basis throughout the project, looking at post-excavation, finds analysis, and then maybe further discoveries as and when throughout the project last year. And there's a link to the vlog site on our website. Also, we got BBC Digging for Britain very interested in the project. There will be, so perhaps the next season is going to be aired next year, the year after. We don't know yet or what year. And just finally, I'd just like to a big thank you to all our project colleagues, not only from my council post, but also Morrison Utility Services, who are the main contractor on site at the moment, one or two of them, which Guard are contracted to. Townsend and Townsend are our project colleagues, management colleagues, and SFN, who will be building the tram itself. But not least, a big thank you to the excavation team for their dedication and hard work, which is in the public eye throughout the project. Has not been easy at times, but they've taken it to heart and really gone with it. And I have to thank Guard Archaeology very much for that. But also to this very hard year, obviously with COVID and everything that's gone round a bit. So I just end it there. Thank you very much.